for models cannot install Linux to the internal hard drive of the PS4. So for those models, you will need a USB drive for your Linux installation. Okay, so we'll start on the PS. For we need to get a few things configured. We're gonna head into our settings. We're gonna scroll down to System Settings, and then make sure that Enable HDMI Device Link is disabled or unchecked, and make sure that Enable HDCP is also unchecked right here. And then from there, we need to head up to our sound and screen settings. Go to our video output settings and change the resolution from either automatic or 4000 down to 1080p. Because you will not regain a signal when booting into Linux. If you have it set to 4K, it needs to be set to 1080p. That is a requirement. We also want the RGB range set to full. This isn't a requirement, but when it's not set to full, then when booting into Linux, you can have it seem really dark. Like the screen is really dark, like the brightness all the way down unless you have RGB range on full. You can see that the two options, they're side by side. So that's why I have that on full. We also want HDR turned off as well. And I just have deep color output also turned off. So those are the settings that you want to have set there. Then we're gonna head back to our Gold 10 settings. And we're gonna go down to the server settings and enable the bin loader server, because the payload for Linux needs to be loaded using the bin loader server. And then finally, we also want to head over to our settings menu. Scroll down to System Information. And you want to make sure that you're using Golden version to point for B17.3 or higher. So nothing lower than B17.3. So make sure you're using the most up-to-date version of Golden. And also you want to note down the Southbridge. That shows up at the bottom there, so Belize 2 in my case. This is important because there's different Linux kernel versions that target different Southbridge chips. And you want to make sure that you are downloading the correct kernel version for the chip that you have, so take a note of the Southbridge chip that you have. In my case, it's Belize 2. Okay, so if we switch over to the computer, there's three things that we need to download. We need our distro that we want to run on the PS4. We need our kernel image, and we also need our interim FS file, which is kind of our intermediary UH shell that we can use to boot into Linux. So we need all three of those things, so we can head to ps4linux.com/downloads. And in here you have a bunch of different distros that you can download. So there's a lot of Arch-based distros. We've got Fedora-based distros and Ubuntu-based distros now, here. I'm going to use Fedora 38 by DFOS. The reason for this is that it's pretty easy, user-friendly to get set up and update. And also it is good for gaming cause it has LXDE pre-installed, it has low idle RAM usage, and it's got a lot of good pre-installed things. So generally it's a pretty good one to use, so I'm gonna go for that. I wouldn't really recommend Arch-based distros for beginners because they are a pain in the ass to update, especially since a lot of these were made many months ago, sometimes years ago, and they're very difficult to update. And another option would be Pop! OS. There's Pop! OS 20.0 for by Noob for 04. This is also a good distro to use. However, it does have high RAM usage and is not the best for gaming. So because we want good for gaming plus also easy to update and maintain and install additional applications, we're gonna go with this Fedora 38 distro. So this is the one I'm gonna select. You can pick whichever distro you want to use here. So from here, what we want to do is go down to the download section. Download Fedora 38. So download the actual operating system file itself from the Mega or MediaFire link. And then we also want the kernel that goes with it. So this is the kernel/bz image. And there is, as you can see, different versions for different Southbridge types. So if you remember, mine was a Belize 2, which means I would download this kernel image for Belize systems. So if you have a Belize Southbridge like me, you would download this one. And if you have a Bicol Southbridge, which is, I think, just PS4 Pros, certain PS4 then Pros, you would download one of these kernel images. So download the kernel image that matches the type of Southbridge chip that your PS4 has. And we also want our FS file, which I will leave a link to here on MediaFire. You can also download that. Now, in addition to that, there are some additional UH kernel images here, which I will leave linked in the description. If you have trouble booting into Linux, you can try some of these other kernel images. For the different Southbridge chips, I would always recommend starting with the highest version. And then if that doesn't work, you can work your way down to a lower version, and then the most stable version is for 0.14. But it's such an old kernel version that you're missing out on a lot of features if you can't get one of the higher installed. It's also important to note that the bical Southbridges, so any PS4 South that use that Southbridge, have no HDD support, which basically means you're gonna have to install a USB drive or external storage drive instead of the internal drive of the PS4 if you do have a bical Southbridge, unfortunately. So if you're going to be installing a USB drive, you're going to want to plug that USB drive into your computer. Use a program like Rufus to format it. So we're gonna open up Rufus here. I'll leave links for all of this stuff down in the video description. We're gonna list USB hard drives. Select your USB drive in the device list. For the boot selection, you're going to select non-bootable. And then make sure partition scheme is set to MBR. And we also want the file system set to FAT32 to it can be large FAT32 or regular FAT32. Just make sure it's set to FAT32 and then click start. And format that drive, obviously. Back up any data on it before reformatting it. So then once that's done, you can then copy all of your Linux files onto the USB. We can get rid of these files here. You also need to make sure the distro's file name is psexit. arch.tar.whatever it is, a gz or an exe file. Otherwise, it's not going to install. So if it's got a different file name, make sure you rename it to psexit arch.tar. Whatever it is, gz or exe, and we can copy our distro to the USB. And then for the bz image file, we'll extract this out to our desktop. So this is our kernel image, and we're gonna also copy that over to our USB. And then the interim fs file. If we open up this folder, so for installing to the USB, we're gonna select external HDD and copy this file, extract it out to the root of the USB. And that's it, you've got all of the files. So all you have to do is plug it into a USB port on the PS4, and you'll be ready to load Linux. Okay, so now if you want to install Linux to the instead of a USB, what we're gonna do is head over to our gold hand settings, go down to the server settings and enable the FTP server. Again, make sure you have a network connection on your PS4 and note down the address and port number that show up in that notification. And we're gonna open up FTP client like FilaZilla or WinSCP. Type in the IP address that showed up in that notification and then the port number 2121, and we're gonna connect our remotely. PS4's hard drive. We're then gonna go down to the user folder, and then we're gonna go to the system folder. And in here, we're gonna create a new directory. So right-click directory, and the directory name is going to be boot. And we're gonna go into that folder. And then we're just going to take our bz image file and copy it inside. And we're also gonna take our distro and copy that inside. And while that's copying, we're gonna take our interim fs file. We're gonna open up the zip file. We're gonna select internal HDD this time. And then select your Southbridge type Yolian or Belize. In my case, mine is a Belize, so I'm gonna select the Belize one. And extract that out to my desktop. And then we can also copy this over to the boot folder on our hard drive. And now we have all three of those files in the boot user folder. System boot. So that's what we want there. So from here we can exit out of our FTP. So you want to make sure that your PS4 again has a network connection for loading Linux, since we're loading it from the bin loader. So we have a valid IP address in there. Okay, so now we're actually ready to load Linux. So make sure is plugged in if you're loading it from that. Make sure you have the files. Copy to the boot folder on the hard drive. If you're booting it from the internal drive. And we're gonna open up the internet browser now. And we're gonna go to the website es7in1.site from Echo Stretch. This will index a couple of exploits hosts that we can use on 11.0. We're gonna head over to Chameleon's host here and press X on that. And from here, we're gonna go to our Linux VRAM payloads. So here we have all of the Linux payloads. So all you have to do here is select the one that matches your firmware version. So I'm on 11.0, so it'll be one of these 11.0 And you also want to select the 1 GB VRAM payload, which means 1 GB of the system memory gets allocated as video memory, and the rest is allocated as system memory. But once you have successfully installed the Linux distribution, the next time you want to boot into Linux, you can use one of the higher VRAM payloads, the 2 GB. VRAM payload is recommended once you have Linux installed, but install Linux in the first place, we are gonna have to run the 1 GB. You're gonna run the 1 GB VRAM payload, the payload. Received message pops up, and then you should get a black screen. So now you just need to wait and hope for the best. Because these Linux payloads are not stable, so what might happen is the LED on the PS4 might just turn off, which means it's crashed and you have to turn it back on and try again. Another thing that can happen is it can get stuck on a white LED, which also means that it's frozen and you'll have to try again. What you're looking for is for the LED color to change to a blue LED and kind of flashing purple every couple of seconds. If you see that, that means it's actually successfully booted into the Linux shell. And if you don't regain signal after about 10 or 20 seconds, then there may be a misconfiguration in terms of the settings. Remember, you have to have it set to 1080p and turned off and all of that stuff we showed in the beginning. Make sure you've done that, otherwise you will not regain a signal after booting into Linux. But if you have everything set up correctly, it should eventually regain a signal you into the shell, as you can see here. So at this point, you're gonna want to plug in a keyboard into your PS4 and start typing. Make sure you can actually type, because if you try and type and then the console just immediately turns itself off, that's usually a sign that you have the wrong kernel version for the type of Southbridge chip that you have on your PS4, and you'll have to try a different BZ image file. So the command to install the distro from a USB drive is going to be exec space install -psxit arch.sh. And then you hit enter, and that should automatically start unpacking the distro. If you are installing to the internal hard drive of the PS4, then the command is going to be different. It's going to be x space install -linux-hdd.sh and press enter. And then it will ask you the amount of storage you want to dedicate to the Linux install on the hard drive. So just make sure you enter a number that is sensible. So I have a terabyte hard drive in my PS. For Pro, I'm free to say give it about 200 gigabytes to dedicate to my Linux install, and I'll press enter. And then after about a minute or so, it should eventually start unpacking the distro, just like it does when installing from the USB method. So there it goes there, it's now unpacking everything and installing the distro to the internal hard drive. So that's how you install to the internal drive as well as from a USB. Once the installation is finished, it can take a while, can take anything from say 15 to potentially half an hour depending on the speed of your drive and that it's installing to. But once it's finished installing, it might just boot you straight into the distro. If it doesn't, it might put you back to the shell here to enter another command. You're just gonna want to type in the resume -boot command a few times until it eventually starts booting into the distro. And then another problem that I also on my PS4 Pro, this probably won't happen for you, it depends what PS4 you have, but in my case, I do not regain a signal. I just get stuck on this blank screen, this black screen, after it tries to boot into the distro. The fix for this is to refresh the HDMI input, which you can do by unplugging the HDMI cable and plugging on your PS4, and then it will go to no signal. From there, I can hold down the Control and Alt key and press F2 and then F1, and that will switch. F2 switches it to the text-only terminal, and then F1 will switch it back to the graphical user interface, and that will refresh it so that I can regain a signal. Something that most people probably won't have to deal with. But from whatever reason, my PS4 has that issue, so that's how I can fix it. Okay, so now we can log and select our account here. The password is PS4 Linux, but you can find the password for your distro and next to the download on ps4linux.com. Okay, so firstly, I'm just gonna make things a little bit bigger. We'll go into preferences, customize look and feel, and then we will increase this to say maybe 14. To make things a little bit easier to see here. So now you can get connected up to your network by clicking on the network icon and selecting your wireless network. Or if the drivers are not working, you'll have to use an Ethernet cable instead. With that, if we open up our menu here, we've got quite a lot of options. We've got accessories, got a bunch of options. Here in the accessories, we've got the CMU emulator built in for running your Wii U games. We've got the Nintendo 3DS emulator Citra also installed. Lutris is also installed Steam is installed, and we also have Yuzu. Remember Yuzu, so the first thing we want to do is set up swap space. On our system, if we go into our system tools and we select HTOP, this will give us some information here. Let's zoom in. So you can see that it's only using around 800 megabytes of RAM while idling, and this is why this is a good distro to use, because that's more system memory that's free for running your games and other tasks that you want to do on the system. So we can also see that we don't have any swap setup right now, and that's a problem because when running a lot of emulators that cache things in memory, you can end up using up all the memory on the system, and then the whole console will just freeze and completely crash. So we want to set up some swap space so we have virtual memory on the hard drive or the USB drive that it can use when it uses up all the memory in the system to prevent it from crashing. So definitely useful, especially when caching shaders for emulators. So what we're gonna do is just go ahead, Control-C to exit out of that will open up the terminal down here in the bottom left-hand corner. We'll get things zoomed in quite a bit here. So to set up swap space, we're gonna do sudo fallocate-l. And then we'll give it the size, which is gonna be for gigabytes. I usually give it for gigabytes of swap space, but you can enter whatever size you want to use and then we're gonna do /swap file. And then -x and press enter the password PS4 Linux. So that command can take about a minute to execute. So once it's done, we're then going to do sudo command 600 /swap file. And then we'll do sudo mkswap to make it a swap file /swap file. And then we'll do sudo swap on /swap file. And that will activate it. And then to make it permanent, we're gonna do sudo nano /etc/ /stab. And then we're gonna scroll down to the bottom here, and we're gonna do /swap file. Then tab none. Tab again swap, tab again SW, and then we'll do tab again 0/0. And then Control-S to save, Control-X to exit. And that should be it. So now if we run HTOP again, you'll see that it now shows up that we have 3.73 swap space available. So that should prevent our system from freezing in worst case scenarios. So at this point, things are going to be different if you're running a different distribution. If you're running a Fedora-based distro like me, then you'll be able to follow the next steps here, which is to update the distro, because we want to get it updated, which will then allow us to install additional applications. So we're gonna do sudo dnf update now. This is the normal update command. You do not want to just run this because it will override some of the custom drivers that are installed to work with the PS, and it will break your distro. It will break your graphical user interface. So what we want to do is we're gonna do sudo dnf update -x to exclude the packages that have the custom drivers. We're gonna exclude the kernel. And then we're gonna do *mesa and then *lib. 500 rm and then again * and xorg -x11-d rv-a. So you want to exclude those for packages right there, then press enter. And that will run the normal update command, and it will not override our custom drivers for the PS, for which is good. It'll probably take a long time to update because this distro is made a while. So we've got 1.6 gigabytes. So we'll just type Y for yes and press enter, and then let it install all of the packages and get the distro again, updated. This will take quite a bit of time here. Okay, so we got the update complete. If we re-enter the command again, just to make sure everything is up to date. And there we go, we can see we have nothing to do, so we have successfully updated the system. This means we can get some other things installed, so we can do dnf install, and then we can select what packages we want to install. So I would say let's install a Wii and GameCube emulator Dolphin. So we'll do dolphin-emu, and we'll also install retrork, which is not pre-installed, so retrork and dolphin. We'll get those installed, and there we go, Y for yes to install. Okay, and there we go, that is complete. So we should have those now. If we head to our game section here, you can see we now have the Dolphin emulator added, and we've also got retrork also added. So there it is, their RetroArch, so we can play lots of games from lots of different systems using these emulators now. So the easiest way to configure settings like the date and time, a keyboard layout and language, is to just log out of the current desktop and switch the desktop environment to the GNOME desktop environment instead. Log back in and then you can go to the settings. In the top right hand corner, the little settings cog. And then in there, you'll have the option to change your keyboard layout, your language, as well as the date and time settings. And you can adjust it to whatever settings you like, and then once you're done configuring the settings, you can log out and log back into the LXD desktop environment so that you get the lower RAM usage. Okay, so let me do a little bit of rapid on how to set up things for gaming. So you do have a Bluetooth. Built in down here, you can see Bluetooth is enabled. So you can, of course, search for Bluetooth devices and you can add your PlayStation for controller or a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. Using this if you want to add your controller as a Bluetooth device so you can use it for your games and emulators. Also, when it comes to emulator setup, make sure that you go to the graphics settings and select the Vulkan render, otherwise it will default to open GL, which is generally gonna give you less performance. So whenever you're using any emulators, make sure you select if Vulkan. You have the option, because that is gonna give you better performance. And then you can just add your PS4 controller in the controller settings and bind all of the buttons. And you'll be ready to run your emulators. So next we also have Steam, of course, for running PC games. So when it comes to Steam, you want to enable Steam Play so that you can run games that only have a Windows version on the PS for using the Proton compatibility layer. You can do this by heading into your Steam settings in the top left-hand corner and going down to the compatibility section and enabling Steam Play for all other titles. It will require a reboot, but it will then allow you to install the Windows version of your games and you'll be able to run them with Proton. Now, when I tried to run some games with Proton, for example, Halo the Master Chief Collection, I did have to, adjust the settings to get it to display properly. I set it to 720p and it with low settings enabled. However, I was still getting pretty poor performance, like 40 frames per second. It wasn't very good, it was, dropping frames quite consistently. And then also when it comes to another game, an older game, I tried Supreme Commander. It was running at like 1 frame per second. So what you can do if you're struggling to get good performance with these PC games is it's a good idea to go to ProtonDB. And in there you can search for your game. And it will give you some compatibility settings from different users to improve performance. So with Halo, the Master Chief Collection, I saw somebody posted that it runs better on Proton version 8.0.5. So I just, changed the Proton version. For some reason, Steam kind of glitches out on the menus. I had to use big picture mode in order to be able to change these settings. But I was able to go into the compatibility section and change Proton to 8.0.5. And then when I launched Halo MCC, I was able to get pretty much a solid 60 at least FPS in the opening section. So you can definitely improve performance quite a bit by checking the Proton ADB settings supreme. Commander was the same thing. I tried a few different users, but the one that worked for me was this one right here, where I just had to copy these and launch options, put them into the launch options for the game. And then also I used an older version of Proton that was suggested, and I was able to get good performance on that game as well, when previously it was like only 1 frame per second. So definitely worth finding out what the best settings are for your game, setting things accordingly, and you'll be able to get decent performance with those games. So in the other section, you have access to the Snap Store, which you can use to install additional applications. You also have PS4 Fan Control, which you have to run from the terminal by doing sudo space PS4 Fan Control. That will allow you to adjust the temperature. So you can actually adjust speed based on a temperature threshold, which is pretty useful. And then you also have Lutris to run non-Steam games from other launchers like Ubisoft's launcher, EA's and launcher. Finally, when it comes to returning back to the PS4's operating system, you can just click here and log out. And then you'll have the option to shut down or reboot, and if you select the option to reboot, it will just return you back to the PS4's operating system. And then you'll be back on the PS4 again when you next load Linux. After it's been installed, I would suggest running the 2GB or higher VRAM payloads. Because it's already installed now, if it's installed to the USB, you'll still need the USB plugged in, installed to the hard drive. You should be good, so all you need to run the Linux payload, and once the payload loads, boot you into the shell, but it should automatically then boot you into the distro afterwards. So you shouldn't have to type any commands or reinstall anything. It should just boot you automatically into the distro when you next load it. So that's how you switch between the PS4 operating system and the Linux distribution. So yeah, that's basically it. That's how you get a full Linux distro running on your jailbroken PS4 on 11.0 or lower. Hope you guys enjoyed this one or found the